The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Michael Spencer, and Michael is the founder of Let's Purify, an online business dedicated to the upliftment and purification of the home energy of our living spaces, personal energy fields, and our planet. Michael has honed a process called home energy purification to assist soulful people in releasing attachments to accumulated belongings and experiencing greater freedom in all areas of life. With training as a mental health counselor, Reiki practitioner, and modern-day priestess, Michael brings a wide variety of expertise and a whole lot of heart to her services. Additionally, Michael is the host of the Let's Purify podcast. Hi, Michael, and welcome.
Hi, Lourdes. Thank you so much for having me.
I am really looking forward to our conversation because I feel like this topic is something I can so relate to in the sense of, I'm all about decluttering, and I'm so excited. Something that people are really beginning to value and, and they're longing for and trying to bring into their lives. However, I feel that it's much more than just taking stuff out of your home and putting it in a bag or bringing it to Goodwill. There's a deeper process that happens there. And I think that in order for the decluttering to really be meaningful and to stick, you also have to look at what's beneath all of it. And so I'm really excited about our conversation because I know that that's a big, big component of how you approach this process.
Exactly. Yeah. And thank you so much. Every time I hear people talking about the minimalism movement, it helps me to really appreciate this home energy purification has a great home right now in just where we are culturally. There is this minimalism movement and, of course, the tidying up movement. So I feel like it's a perfect time to be exploring a little bit deeper our relationship with our stuff.
And so my first question is actually two questions. I usually like to start with asking my guests how they were drawn to this area. However, I feel that with your niche, it's almost where I need to start with what is this area? Because the way that you describe this, the way that you approach this is very different. So I almost feel like the question is, what is home energy purification? What does it mean? And then after we know what it is, then I'm able to ask, and why were you drawn to this? Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I think that's a great way to dive in. So home energy purification is a process that has 5 components, and I'll run through them quickly. And then it's also what I consider to be a spiritual practice because it's a very intuitive, felt sense type of experience of getting to really understand our attachments to our accumulated belongings, why it's challenging to let them go, and just having a sense of how we feel in our spaces and around our things. And then also, as I said a moment ago, it's a process of helping people to get really clear about how they want their spaces to feel and look and how they want to be in their spaces, and then being able to, in some sort of systematic, although not rigid way, be able to sort through those accumulated belongings, addressing the emotions, the belief systems that we might have around why it's challenging to let go of something, and then being able to actually let those items go that may no longer be serving a person and aren't necessarily serving the path that they want to go on. So the 5 areas that I like to help people address as they are preparing to do, and I call it decluttering. And it's also, as you pointed out in the very beginning of our conversation, it's so much deeper than that. So I use that word because it's something people are familiar with. And it is a much more soulful and deep process than just having a new system for where you put the mail when it comes in, which is important. And this is a little bit different than that. So these 5 areas that I help people with are the intention setting and creating a vision, because that can be something that can really help us to stay inspired and motivated. Because if we're doing a major clean out, of an entire basement or an attic or a whole home, the process can get kind of messy. It can feel tedious at times. So knowing where we're heading is really important to help people to stay connected and not just close those doors and say, forget it, I'm not doing it. The next area is grounding and mindfulness. So bringing our mindfulness skills, maybe a little guided meditation into this experience, because a lot of times the reason that we avoid these spaces are because it does bring up a lot of strong emotions. It may just be sheer overwhelm because of the volume of stuff that is accumulated. It can also be shame or embarrassment about having some folks. It's really challenging knowing that behind this door, whether it's a guest bedroom or a closet or a different storage space, that there's a big mess. And, the rest of their life may look organized. And so sometimes it's kind of about the shadow work. And I really like to encourage people to use their grounding skills, and I teach them if they feel like they don't have them already, to be able to stay put, to be able to breathe into the body, and to be able to handle the emotions as they come in those waves, so that they can actually move through decluttering, sorting through, letting go. So that's a really big piece of it, is just helping people to stay present for the process. And then I love teaching people how to tune in with their intuition or inner guidance system, so that they can feel what resonates for them on a deep level and get underneath that thinking mind that says, society says I should hold on to this for this reason, or my family beliefs say you don't let go of a family heirloom, and so I have to hold on to this, or oh, it's so rude to re-gift, and what would happen if this person realized that I let go of something that they gifted me? It's getting underneath all of that and really tuning in with what's the truth of you, which is essentially what home energy purification is about. We walk through our lives and we carry some baggage around naturally because we need some stuff. We need shelter. We need some comforts. And we get to get really clear intuitively, and again, with that inner guidance system, about what is it that I truly want to carry with me.
I think, that's so powerful what you said about the essence of home energy purification, really getting to the truth of you, because I feel that, that really helps us to understand the complexity and the resistance and the fear around this process, because the truth of who we are, when we discover it, means a lot of different things. And some of those meaning, I think, are very scary, even if they're good.
Yeah. This work can be kind of daring. We're going into those dark places of avoidance and denial a lot of times. These things, I've talked with people who it's been 2 decades, 3 decades since they've faced this stuff. Maybe they had a life event and there are objects associated with that event that went down to the corner of the basement, and that's where they've been. And what I think is important for us to recognize is that just because that's hidden away in the basement doesn't mean that it's not present in our energy fields. And so we are carrying that whether we are conscious of it or not. So one of the words that I don't use at all, and if it resonates for someone else, I'm totally fine with that. And I don't use the word purge, because to me, that is like just getting rid of everything in a way, like the way that I perceive that word is, just getting rid of everything, just clearing everything out, and how that could feel really exposing and harsh. That if this stuff is serving as a protection, my way of working with that isn't to say, well, you've just got to get rid of it all, and this really intense process. And not that home energy purification doesn't get intense, because it does at times. And it's really about approaching ourselves with love and compassion, and approaching the stuff with love and compassion. It's not the enemy. There's nothing wrong with the stuff. It's just getting real with ourselves and going, do I want to keep carrying this? Is it time? So it does get to be a very gentle process that's done at whatever rate is good for a person. And I'll just throw this in there because I always like to make sure that people are aware. I do have training as a mental health counselor, as it says in my bio, and this is not a counseling service. So if it fits into a particular model, it's definitely more like coaching. And so if somebody is experiencing, really strong attachment, sometimes there's tremendous grief that can come up, or other intense feelings if objects are representing old trauma. So I recommend and highly encourage people to get the counseling work that they need around these things too, because sometimes these attachments are intense. I think for some of the folks that I work with, they are at a place in their lives where they feel ready. So maybe they've already done some counseling in the past and have worked through some of the more intense feelings and thoughts, and now they're ready to go into these places and feeling a bit more prepared. And for other folks, I definitely can recommend doing some treatment with a counselor or a therapist concurrently as we're working through things, so that I can be helping with the process, and on some level, certainly acknowledging and reflecting the emotions. And they may want to be in, weekly or every other week counseling, just to be able to go deeper with somebody who's able to hold that space. And the fourth area, my work is really geared to people who consider themselves to be spiritual or soulful, and who are open to playing with energy, even if they don't quite know what that means, that it's just like, oh, that appeals to me. And so I bring in using energy tools, and an energy tool can be anything that shifts up our energy fields, the energy patterns of our stuff, the energy of spaces. So I wish you could see me, because my eyes get really big when I'm talking about this, because it's so exciting. Because what it does is it brings a sense of fun and joy and playfulness to this process, as well as bringing a sense of being able to take some really what might look like very small steps at the beginning, but are so powerful. So for instance, if somebody says, I can't even go in this room without feeling overwhelmed because there's so much stuff or because of the emotions, I might suggest, I have a podcast episode where I talk about a whole process of just knocking on the door, and so that changes the vibration of the room itself because of the sound vibrations that happen. And it's also sending a message to the subconscious, like, okay, I'm going to be coming in there soon. So maybe you knock on the door every day for 3 days, just to bring awareness, bring presence, and you're doing something. And so other things that I might suggest are if someone is able to burn sage in their home, or there's a wood from South America called Palo Santo. Both of those are really great for shifting up the energy. And so burning a little bit of that in the room itself, and that may be all you do that day. And it's getting into the space and acknowledging, and it's preparing, and it tends to have some really beautiful effects. And it's also pairing something really beautiful and what we might call a spiritual practice with something that maybe we don't feel that great about. Maybe we're frustrated or angsty about being in this space. Maybe we kind of feel like we're against this stuff, or this stuff is against us. And so we're almost like blessing it by bringing some of these really beautiful practices into it.
I really love that, because I think, this also, when we're thinking of these energy tools, they are actually very much connected to neuroscience, in the sense of, we're creating new neural pathways, a new way of experiencing something that, they've only experienced a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing that in these small steps, and it's not too much, it's not scary, it's manageable, it's creating a whole new experience of something. And I think also this speaks to another part of the process, which I know you also, you've talked about on your podcast, and that's the power of ritual.
Yes. And so, this is the kind of the area where I talk about that. And so a ritual, again, can be anything that we want it to be. And, it's something that we do in some consistent manner. And again, it's feeling into that intuition and creating our own rituals. And I also encourage ceremony as well. So as we are sorting through and maybe deciding, okay, this box of old papers I feel really complete with, and I want to let them go. And maybe I don't want to just send them to the recycle bin. Maybe I want to burn some of them ceremonially to release whatever energy is contained in them into the ethers. There's so many different ways to use ritual and ceremony in this work. And I think what happens, and I'm so glad that you brought the neuroscience into it, because it really does shift up those pathways. And it just allows us to bring, rather than this feeling like a chore or something we just have to get through. And often these spaces have been nagging at people for a long time. And so to finally get in there and feel like, oh, I'm bringing my spiritual self, I'm bringing my whole self to this process, and I don't have to fight it. I might actually enjoy it. I often encourage people who work with crystals, bring your crystals in. You want to put some black tourmaline on the lid of this box to absorb some negative energy before you open it up? Great. You want to use some selenite to open to the higher realms and maybe invite in the angels? Great. So it just gets to be so fun and playful, as well as being really a depth-oriented experience.
And I love too that with this aspect, it can really be personal to the individual and meaningful as to what tools they'd like to use, what approach. It's not limited to just one way. There are many different ways, a lot of things that we have access to that can help us with these rituals or ceremonies that will make this experience, really meaningful.
Yes. And then before we go down too many more paths, the last area that I like to help people be really prepared with is the practical and logistical. If somebody's doing a big process, they might want to consider, oh, there's a lot of big, heavy furniture that needs to be moved. And I can't do that by myself. That's not a one-person job. So starting to consider at the very beginning, wow, who might be able to help with that? Or is there a service that I could hire? Is there a neighbor? So all of those practical and logistical things that can really immediately trip us up. So I know one of the things that I need to deal with in my own life is getting rid of some old paint that I'm not going to use anymore. And so I've started doing some research on, okay, how do I get rid of this? And these are things that I want to start sharing on my podcast as well, because it's so easy to go, oh, I don't know what to do with that. Or I have all these old documents that need to be shredded. I don't even know how to deal with that. I don't have a shredder. And so those are things that can cause us to just stop. And so I feel like the more prepared we are, the easier it is to address the deeper mental, emotional, spiritual aspects that go along with this. So we don't give ourselves those outs of, oh, well, I don't have any boxes right now to start boxing stuff up, so I'll just put this off. It's like, well, at the very beginning, let's consider what types of supplies are you going to need? And what do you need? If you're working in your attic and you choose to do this in July in a hot climate, do you need to make sure that you have appropriate ventilation so that you can actually be up there? You're going to need to bring things down and sort through them in a different room. So these very basic, yet these factors that can become barriers if we don't address them.
So really preparing fully for this journey that you're embarking on and anticipating aspects of it that could stop us in our tracks or derail us.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you use the words purify and purification throughout this process. It's on your website. You have a podcast called Let's Purify.
Right.
And I know that you didn't choose those words by accident. That was intentional. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way that I have to say, almost stumbled into this, because it's a very deep niche, I was doing a series of 21-day seasonal cleanses. So every 3 months for a year, with some breaks in there. There wasn't anything rigid about it. It was just when I felt called to do these seasonal cleanses, I was engaging with these, and they were very much about eliminating some of the foods that can be irritating to our systems, like gluten, sugar, dairy, caffeine, and then adding in foods that are very wholesome and nourishing, and also foods that are available in the season that we're in, depending on the climate that we're in. And there was also a lot of Kundalini Yoga, which is a type of yoga that really has a lot of focus on our energy fields and clearing out the energy fields, the emotions. And these cleanses were also Ayurvedically rooted. So they would work with particular organ systems, depending on which organ system connected with a particular season. So they were very in-depth experiences that really, for me, I felt like I was clearing out my body of toxins on a cellular level, really deep stuff, as well as clearing out old emotions that were stored physically. So just a really beautiful, purifying experience for my body, my mind, my emotions. And what happened is the more clear I was becoming in my physical experience, in my body and in my emotions, I started looking around my home space and noticing where some stagnant energy had accumulated in the form of accumulated belongings that I had just been kind of dragging around with me somewhat unconsciously, move to move. It would be like, oh, well, here are the boxes that I'll need to find a new closet for in the move, without really being clear about, why am I dragging these things around with me? And then there were a couple of boxes that I had tried to go through at times in the past, and I did not have success. I would do what a lot of folks who I talk with do, where we have great intentions and we're going to do it. We're going to finally get through this box or this room or this closet or this basement. And we open the door or take the lid off the box and go, oh my gosh, that is too much. There's too much in there. It's so many decisions. I can't do it. And just putting the lid back on or closing the door and, I don't know, going and getting a latte and watching Netflix or going to work or doing whatever we do. I was tired of that process and tired of not being able to address whatever it was in these boxes. And I quite spontaneously had this inspiration to do it differently. Of really, I mean, I've done a lot of mindfulness work and meditation, both in my counseling practice when I had a counseling practice and was working as a mental health counselor, and in my own personal life and, teaching meditation. So it was something about like, why don't I bring some of those skills to this? And then having a spiritual practice that's developed over the years, going, well, a lot of these tools are all about shifting energy, and this energy over here feels really stagnant. So what if I drum around this? What if I rattle around this? What if I put on some really upbeat music that makes me feel like I am powerful and that I can do this? And so I just started playing with these different ways of being with the accumulated belongings and creating a lot of space to be with the emotions and noticing the belief systems that were coming up. And I had one particular photograph that was a picture of my paternal grandparents that hung in my house when I was growing up. And I had a copy of this, and it was hanging above the mantle. It was in a very kind of a reverential place. So I had a copy of this photo in a particular box of photos that I was going through early on in my own, what I came to start calling home energy purification process. And when I looked at this photo, I felt dull and kind of depressed. It was a black and white photo. The subjects of the photo were not smiling, and yet I got caught up because this was a photo that someone felt was important in my family, that it was hanging above the mantle. And these are my grandparents. I should care about this. And yet I did not want this photo in my presence. And so it was that moment, I think, that I connected with my own sense of sovereignty and autonomy to say, you know what, just because other people in my family revere this picture, I don't have to, and I'm letting it go. It was a very powerful moment. And then things just sort of continued to unfold from there. I went through my whole house. My husband and I collaborated on our shared belongings. And at some point along the way, I thought, I want to help people do this. And I've got this counseling background, so I know how to work with people. And this is what I want to do.
It's really beautiful, that your own experiences have really informed how you navigate through this with others, that you are really speaking from your own experiences. And I love that description of how you worked with this photograph or this picture and really paying attention to what was coming up for you and asking yourself the hard questions. It just it's such a powerful way to approach the different pieces of this process.
Yeah.
So what happens if a person is ready to go through this process, but others in the family are not?
That's such a good question. Yeah. I always like to point people in the direction, particularly if you're sharing a space with others, that it's okay to just begin with our own stuff. So just because roommates or partners or children aren't ready doesn't mean that someone can't do this with their own belongings, the things that they have the exclusive ability to make the decisions about. And that, we don't necessarily need someone else's approval to do that. We may need some help and support. And so if someone wants to go through their stuff that's in the attic, they might want to check in and see if a partner or whoever they are sharing space with would be willing to help them, maybe to move things, or, maybe even to be a little involved in their process without putting any pressure on the other party to have to go through their stuff. And what happens often is when the person who's doing the purifying begins to really start to notice these benefits. And sometimes they start sharing with family members like, oh my gosh, I feel so free because I let go of XYZ. And other folks start to go, that sounds really great. And I wonder what that could be like if I did that. And I sometimes use my husband as an example. So I started my own process with my closet and, things that were exclusively mine. And he is very flexible. And so I started making piles in the living room of stuff that was going to be donated or given away. And, he was fine with the fact that it looked like there was a yard sale happening in our living room for a couple of months. And so it's important to have communication with other folks in our spaces that if that's not okay with them, if that's too chaotic, where can you put these things that it will work for you to be able to do the process and work for them in not feeling overly disruptive? And then seeing if the other folks, even if they don't want to go through their own stuff at this time, if they'd be willing to collaborate on the shared objects. So my husband was willing to go through our kitchen stuff together, since there were things that we had purchased together, things that we had both brought in and we both cook. So it's like, oh, let's see, are there things that we can thin out of here and things that don't really represent what we do in the kitchen. I had some like bundt pan or something that I hadn't used for ages. It's like, let's give this to somebody else who can use it.
What about things that have sentimental value? What are some general, I guess, guidelines or things to help you with that process?
Yeah. I think a couple things, and I'm glad you asked this because I was thinking earlier, I want to talk about transforming objects. So it can be really interesting to come across something that we have a sentimental connection with that we don't necessarily just want sitting in a box anymore. If we recognize, I've got this connection. So I guess there are two things. One, if there's something sentimental that you don't feel ambivalent about, it's like, this is sentimental and I want to keep it, then my gosh, keep it, celebrate it. And can it be, and does a person want it to be transformed into something? I mean, a classic example is like, I've got all these old concert t-shirts. Do you pay someone or do you do it yourself to make those into a quilt or a tapestry so that they can be celebrated and not just moldering away in a bag in the attic or in the back of a drawer? So getting creative about these things that we have a sentimental attachment to so that maybe they can be honored in some way in the home and they can be seen and explored and just celebrated, as well as it's also okay to still keep things. It's okay to go, I have a sentimental attachment to this. I don't want to transform it into art for my home. I just want it to be in the attic. Great. And so it is. You can do that. This is a very empowering process where you get to choose what you want to do with your stuff.
It just seems as if the key here is that there's this process of exploring, reflecting upon what this object means to you, and then moving forward. So it's very intentional.
Exactly. And if there are objects that have a sentimental connection that a person realizes, when there's that ambivalence, this feels like it should be sentimental, I should care about it secretly, and I don't even want to say it out loud, I don't want it. I hate it. And so it's bringing that out into the light. And when I work with people, I don't have any attachment to whether or not you want to keep your collection of Beanie Babies, If you love them, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And celebrate them. And if you are like, wow, people have been giving me, I'm just using that hilarious Beanie Baby example. People have been giving me Beanie Babies every year for Christmas for the past 25 years, and I don't really like them anymore. It's like, okay, this is an opportunity to get real with ourselves.
Because it's almost this, this is what I thought of when you said that, an opportunity to become real with ourselves. And if you're not able to be real with yourself with an object, it's really going to be difficult out in the world. I mean, because right now it's between you and this object. And can you tell yourself the truth about how you feel about this object?
Exactly.
And so, Michael, I could just talk to you about this forever, but thank you so much, because what you've shared already has just been really helpful for me. And I know that it will be to our listeners as well. I wanted to ask you, you have a podcast called Let's Purify.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that's all about?
Sure. Because this phrase, home energy purification, it's like you asked at the beginning of this, what does that actually mean? What's the significance of purification? And the podcast is an opportunity for me to just talk more about this, give examples. I interview people about their relationships with their belongings, their stories of purification, and also providing tips. Like I just did an interview with a woman that specializes in mindfulness and productivity. And so I talked with her about digital decluttering, because, we can also have these relationships with our digital devices and how that can impact us. And so the podcast is a place for people to come every week and get a little bit more inspiration and a little bit more of this practical guidance on what purification can mean to them and how they can get into those spaces and start the process for themselves.
And you know what? I just remembered I had another question. I have to ask this, so I know we've already started to kind of move towards wrapping up, but I think our listeners will find this really helpful. Do you have any suggestions for this process of purification as we move towards the holidays? Because this is a time I feel that we bring in more stuff, whether it's we're receiving gifts, whether it's preparing for company, for decorating. It's just a time, I think, when we can fall asleep to what's coming in and out of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm so glad that you asked that. And yes, there are a whole bunch of things that popped into my mind. I think this time before the gift-giving holidays, as we're entering into the beginning of November, the mid-November time, it's a great time to have conversations with our loved ones about gift-giving. And, one of the things that I really love about the minimalism movement, and I am not minimalist, and I encourage, anyone who works with me who is like, that's my path. I am so supportive of that. And it's just not where I am in my life. What I love about the minimalism movement is the experiences, not things phrase and an idea. And this can be an opportunity to be talking with people about gifts and what they mean to us, and finding out from others, hey, I always get you a gift every year. And before I go shopping for you, I want to check in. What would be meaningful for you? So this is bringing our own desire to have less stuff into our intentionality around giving to others. And then there may be an opportunity to say, if you haven't gotten anything for me yet, I'm really leaning more towards experiences. I'm doing this purification thing, this decluttering, and not that I feel like your gifts are clutter to me in any way. I'm really just wanting, could we go out to dinner? Could we have an experience together? That would be so meaningful for me. Just having some gentle ways of starting the conversation. So I think, that covers a little bit of the gift giving. I think around, the gatherings and the trip to Target before the party, I've got to get this, that, and the other thing. I think it's really bringing mindfulness, making lists, and really considering. Something that I've started doing is more of a long view. What am I going to be doing with this object in 5 years, in 10 years? Like, am I just buying some plastic junk because I need something to put the silverware in for one party? Well, maybe I can just put the silverware out on the table. Maybe I don't need to actually buy a container for that I'm going to use once every 3 years. It's really getting real with ourselves. And I think you're really acknowledging this piece of, if we don't stem the flow coming in, it doesn't matter how much we, shed, if we're just continuing to bring more in without that mindful, conscious attention, it's going to be feeling like we're on a treadmill.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's really, really helpful. And I just wanted to make sure I asked that because, I know that with the holidays coming on, this is a very real challenge and experience that we all will face to some degree. So thank you for those suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you also have something for our audience. Can you share a little bit about that and how they can access this?
Yeah, when you go to my homepage of my website, and my website is letspurify.energy, about a third of the way down the page, I have an offering to, if you sign up for my email newsletter, you receive a document that's 15 guiding questions to boost clarity as you declutter and shed old baggage. It's the world's longest title, and I need to work on that. What this does is I think it can be very helpful when we're tuning in with that intuitive part of ourselves to have some questions available to help bring us into our own truth rather than leaning into the external, like I said, the old family rules or the societal or cultural rules about what to do with things. This can help us to tune into what's most important to a particular person. And so they're divided up by, I think, like the spiritual aspects, mental, so belief systems, emotions, the practical, do I have, when my mom was doing some clearing out, she had 5 vegetable peelers that had accumulated over time. Can I thin out some just by getting rid of duplicates? So you can, from this list of questions, it can be really nice to tune in with 1 or 2 or 3 main questions that can really help to guide one's process.
And we will be sure to put a link to your website, Michael, along with your Facebook, Instagram, and a link to access your podcast, so that way listeners can access this document and also learn more about your work and get in touch with you if they'd like to go ahead and do that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am really excited about our conversation. I have learned so much. It's been so helpful for me, and I know that it will be for our listeners as well.
Oh, great. I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you, Lourdes.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. You can follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And finally, if you enjoy Women in Depth, please share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.